Welcome to the Appendix, where we read primary sources of the past so that the present can be better understood. Today's primary source, the Battle of Lexington, 1775. The following two extracts present the official American and English versions of the hostilities at Lexington, April 19, 1775. It is apparently impossible to determine at this time who fired the first shot at Lexington. 1. American account of the Battle of Lexington. Account by the Provincial Congress at Watertown, Massachusetts, April 26, 1775. Watertown, April 26, 1775. In Provincial Congress of Massachusetts, to the inhabitants of Great Britain. Friends and fellow subjects, hostilities are at length commenced in this colony by the troops under the command of General Gage, and it being of the greatest importance that an early, true, and authentic account of this inhuman proceeding should be known to you, the Congress of this colony have transmitted the same, and, from want of a session of the Honorable Continental Congress, think it proper to address you on the alarming occasion. By the clearest depositions relative to this transaction, it will appear that on the night preceding the 19th of April instant, a body of the King's troop under the command of Colonel Smith were secretly landed at Cambridge, with an apparent design to take or destroy the military and other stores provided for the defense of this colony, and deposited at Concord. That some inhabitants of the colony, on the night aforesaid, whilst traveling peacefully on the road between Boston and Concord, were seized and greatly abused by armed men, who appeared to be officers of General Gage's army. That the town of Lexington, by these means, was alarmed, and a company of the inhabitants mustered on the occasion. That the regular troops, on their way to Concord, marched into the said town of Lexington, and the said company, on their approach, began to disperse. That, notwithstanding this, the regulars rushed on with great violence, and first began hostilities by the firing on said Lexington company, whereby they killed 8 and wounded several others. That the regulars continued their fire until those of the said company, who were neither killed nor wounded, had made their escape. That Colonel Smith, with the detachment, then marched to Concord, where a number of the provincials were again fired on by the troops, 2 of them killed, and several wounded, before the provincials fired on them, and provincials were again fired on by the troops, produced an engagement that lasted through the day, in which many of the provincials and more of the regular troops were killed and wounded. To give a particular account of the ravages of the troops as they retreated from Concord to Charlestown would be very difficult, if not impractical. Let it suffice to say that a great number of the houses on the road were plundered and rendered unfit for use. Several were burnt. Women in childbed were driven by the soldiery naked into the streets. Old men peacefully in their homes were shot dead, and such scenes exhibited as would disgrace the annals of the most uncivilized nation. These, brethren, are the marks of ministerial vengeance against this colony for refusing with her sister colonies a submission to slavery, but they have not yet detached us from our royal sovereign. We profess to be his loyal and dutiful subjects, and so hardly dealt with as we have been, are still ready with our lives and fortunes to defend his person, family, crown, and dignity. Nevertheless, to the persecution and tyranny of his cruel ministry we will not tamely submit. appealing to heaven for the justice of our cause, we determined to die or be free. By order, Joseph Warren, President. 2. English account of the Battle of Lexington. Report of Lieutenant Colonel Smith to Governor Gage, April 22nd, 1775. Sir, in obedience to your Excellency's commands, I marched on the evening of the 18th, instructed with the corps of grenadiers and light infantry for Concord, to execute your Excellency's orders with respect, destroying all ammunition, artillery, tents, etc., collected there, which was effected, having knocked off the truantness of 3 pieces of iron ordnance, some new gun cartridges, a great number of carriage wheels burnt, a considerable quantity of flour, some gunpowder, and musket balls, with other small articles thrown into the river. Notwithstanding, we marched with the utmost expedition and secrecy. We found the country had intelligence or strong suspicion of our coming, and fired many signal guns, and rung the alarm bells repeatedly. We were informed, when at Concord, that some cannon had been taken out of the town that day, that others, with some stores, had been carried 3 days before, which prevented our having an opportunity of destroying so much as might have been expected at our first setting off. I think it proper to observe that when I had got some miles on the march from Boston, I detached 6 light infantry companies to march with all expedition to seize the 2 bridges on different roads beyond Concord. On these companies' arrival at Lexington, I understand from the report of Major Pitchard, who was with them, and from many officers, that they found on a green close to the road a body of the country people drawn up in military order, with arms and accoutrements, and, as appeared after, loaded, and that they had posted some men in a dwelling and meeting house. Our troops advanced towards them without any intention of injuring them, further than to inquire the reason of their being thus assembled, and, if not satisfactory, to have secured their arms. But they, in confusion, went off, principally to the left. Only one of them fired before he went off, and 3 or 4 more jumped over a wall and fired from behind it among the soldiers, on which the troops returned it and killed several of them. They likewise fired on the soldiers from their meeting and dwelling houses. Rather earlier than this, on the road, a countryman from behind a wall had snapped his piece at Lieutenant Adair and Sutherland, but it flashed and did not go off. After this we saw some in the woods, but marched on to Concord without anything further happening. While at Concord, we saw vast numbers assembling in many parts. At one of the bridges they marched down with a very considerable body, on the light infantry posted there. On their coming pretty near, one of our men fired on them, which they returned, on which an action ensued, and some few were killed and wounded. In this affair it appears that after the bridge was quitted, they scalped and otherwise ill-treated 1 or 2 of the men who were either killed or severely wounded. On our leaving Concord to return to Boston, they began to fire on us from behind the walls, ditches, trees, etc., which, as we marched, increased to a very great degree, and continued without intermission of 5 minutes altogether, for I believe upwards of 18 miles, so that I could not think but it must have been a preconcerted scheme in them to attack the king's troops, the first favorable opportunity that offered. Otherwise, I think they could not in so short a time from our marching out, have raised such a numerous body, and for so great a space of ground. Notwithstanding the enemy's numbers, they did not make one gallant attempt during so long an action, though our men were so very much fatigued, but kept under cover. I have the honor, etc. F. Smith, Lieutenant Colonel, 10th Foot. Thank you for joining us for our primary source today on the appendix. We will see you in the stacks.